I didn't think I was looking for anything. But the moment I stepped into the pet store, I felt it, the strange, unsettling feeling that I wasn't supposed to be here. As I wandered through the aisles, my mind kept circling back to one question: why? Why had she asked me to pick up dog food when we didn't have a dog? I remember it so clearly, her voice that morning, calm and casual, as though she were asking me to grab some bread from the store. "Oh, could you swing by the pet shop and grab a few things? We're low on dog food." The words should have meant nothing. Yet, something about them gnawed at me all day. We don't have a dog. The store was a maze of shelves stacked high with pet toys, cages, treats, and food of every kind. I barely noticed the other customers, my eyes fixed on the rows of dog food. It was almost as if I was expecting to find something, some kind of sign that would explain everything. But there was nothing, no clues, no answers. Then, I saw it. A package of dog food I didn't recognize. It wasn't the kind we'd always bought, the one I had picked up on autopilot for years. This bag was different. The brand was new. The flavor was unfamiliar. My pulse quickened. My mind raced. She had never mentioned a new dog. I grabbed the bag. There was a peculiar sense of urgency that took hold of me. My hand shook slightly as I lifted it to the counter, and the cashier barely glanced at me as she rang up the items. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Where was this dog? As I made my way to the car, I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I was so used to the quiet rhythm of our life together. Quiet mornings, gentle conversations over dinner, lazy weekends spent watching movies. We didn't have a dog. We never had. And yet, here I was, holding the proof of something I didn't understand. Something she hadn't told me about. I wanted to ask her, I wanted to confront her right then and there. But as I drove home, the weight of uncertainty pressed heavier and heavier on my chest. I couldn't shake the thought that I was on the verge of something much bigger than dog food. When I pulled into the driveway, I could see her through the window, moving about the house. She was doing the usual, picking up clothes, straightening the living room. But today, everything felt different. I felt like I was seeing her for the first time in ages, like something had shifted, though I couldn't put my finger on what. I grabbed the bag of food, the weight of it heavier than I wanted to admit, and walked inside. "Hey," I said as I entered, my voice louder than I intended. She looked up, offering me a warm smile. "Hey, babe. Did you get it?" "Yeah," I said, holding up the bag. "New brand." She froze for just a moment, her eyes darting to the bag before meeting my gaze. Yeah. The old brand was out of stock. I thought I'd try something new." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say next. Try something new? I could feel the tension between us, thickening with every second. My stomach twisted. There was something in her voice that sounded rehearsed, as if she had said those words before, in a different context. "Okay," I said slowly, lowering the bag. I could feel my heart thumping against my ribs, each beat loud and insistent. "Just seemed strange, that's all." She nodded, walking over to take the bag from my hands. I know. But don't worry. It's the same thing. Just different packaging." She made it sound so simple, but the words didn't land right. They didn't fit. They didn't match the question that had been swirling in my mind since I stepped into the store. Where is this dog? I watched her disappear into the kitchen with the bag of food, but I couldn't stop staring at the spot where she had stood. My thoughts were a whirlwind. Every little detail from the past few weeks, months even, started to line up in ways that didn't make sense. The extra late nights, the strange phone calls, the hurried trips out when I thought she was just running errands. They had all seemed insignificant at the time, but now, in the light of this one discovery, I wondered if they were pieces to a puzzle I hadn't wanted to see. I forced myself to sit down on the couch. It was a familiar spot, one I had sunk into so many times before, but now it felt foreign. What was she hiding? I could hear the soft sounds of her moving around in the kitchen, the clink of the dog food being poured into a bowl. But there was no dog. No sound of paws against the floor, no tail thumping against the walls. Only the empty noise of our quiet home. My eyes flickered to the corner of the room, where we had placed the empty leash hook months ago. We had gotten it as a joke when we'd talked about getting a dog. But it was just that, a joke. Was she still laughing? Or had she been lying to me this entire time? I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. I knew her. I thought I did. But suddenly, it felt like I didn't know her at all. I stood up, my feet moving of their own accord. I had to know. I walked into the kitchen, standing in the doorway, watching her as she filled the bowl, her back to me. She was humming softly to herself, as if this moment, this strange, unsettling moment, was just another mundane part of the day. But for me, it was anything but mundane. "Where's the dog?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She froze. The spoon she had been holding clinked against the counter. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she turned to face me, her eyes wide and startled. "What do you mean?" Her voice cracked, the calmness gone. "The dog. Where is it?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her eyes darted to the window, to the empty hallway, anywhere but me. I could see the truth hanging between us, heavy and undeniable. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. Her eyes shifted back to me, and for the first time, I saw something I didn't expect. Guilt. It flickered in her eyes for just a second before it was gone, replaced by something harder, something I didn't recognize. She began, but her words caught in her throat. She exhaled sharply, trying to regain composure. "There's no dog." "Not really." I stared at her, my mind struggling to catch up with the confusion that was taking root in my chest. "Not really? What does that mean?" She hesitated, then walked toward me, her movements slow and deliberate. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "It's a metaphor," she said, her voice shaking. "A way of coping, of filling the space where something was missing." "Something?" I asked, feeling my pulse rise. Her gaze flickered, her breath quickening. She was hiding something. I could see it. I had to know what it was. I stood frozen in the kitchen, my mind racing. A metaphor? I couldn't make sense of it. Nothing about what she said lined up with the story I'd been piecing together in my head. I looked at her, the woman I thought I knew so well, and felt like I was staring at a stranger. She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a weak attempt to deflect, to push away the questions that were swirling between us like smoke, impossible to ignore. I could feel the tension tightening around us, wrapping us both in something suffocating. I had no words to express the confusion that was building inside me. What was she hiding? "Are you going to explain this?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. It was a reflex, the frustration bubbling up like a dam ready to break. "You said there's no dog. But you?" I cut myself off, shaking my head in disbelief. "What do you mean by a metaphor?" She opened her mouth to speak, but hesitated, as though struggling to find the right words. She reached up to push her hair behind her ear, a nervous gesture that I had seen 100 times before, but now it felt like a sign. A warning. There's been something I've been dealing with," she began, her voice unsteady. She looked down at the dog food bowl, as if the answer was somehow written on the side of it. "Something I haven't told you. Something I've kept hidden." Her words hung in the air, thick with meaning, yet so vague that I couldn't make heads or tails of them. I needed clarity. I needed her to be honest with me. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but filled with the weight of everything unsaid. "What's going on? Why the dog food? Why the lies?" She took a step back, crossing her arms in front of her chest. A protective gesture. She was pulling away from me, even more so than usual. But this time, I wasn't letting her. "Not now. Not after everything. I didn't want you to know," she said, her words coming out slower, as though she was carefully picking each one. "But it's time I told you the truth." She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath before looking up at me. "I've been seeing someone." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, a shockwave of emotion that stole the breath from my lungs. I didn't know how to react. My world, which had seemed so secure just moments before, was crumbling around me. She was seeing someone else. It didn't make sense. How could I have been so blind? Her eyes searched mine for a reaction, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. The weight of her admission pressed on me, suffocating, overwhelming. I felt sick to my stomach. "How long?" My voice was hoarse, barely audible. The words felt foreign coming from my mouth. She closed her eyes again, her face contorting with guilt. "A few months. Since before we even moved in together. I've been seeing him in secret. I didn't want you to know. I didn't want to hurt you." I stumbled back, my head spinning. I needed to breathe. I needed to think. But all I could hear was the thudding of my own heartbeat in my ears, loud and insistent. The truth was unraveling before me, and I couldn't stop it. "Who is he?" I managed to choke out. I wasn't sure if I wanted to know, but I needed to. I needed to understand how far this betrayal went. She flinched, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of her confession had taken everything out of her. It's someone from work. We've been seeing each other for a while now. I never meant for it to happen. It just did. I shook my head, unable to process what she was telling me. Someone from work? The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was physical. It was right there in front of me, undeniable. I felt sick. Betrayed. Anger surged through me, but I couldn't figure out where to direct it. At her? At myself? I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, my thoughts colliding with each other in a chaotic storm. She had lied to me for months, had kept me in the dark while she shared herself with someone else. And I had been oblivious to it all. I don't even know what to say right now. My voice cracked, the weight of her words crushing me with every syllable. I trusted you. I thought we had something real. Her eyes filled with tears, and I felt a pang of guilt for the harshness in my voice. But it was so hard to process everything. How long had she been lying to me? I never wanted to hurt you, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know how to tell you. It started off so innocent, just a few conversations. And then it turned into something more. More? I echoed, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. How could it turn into something more? You were with me. You promised me. She wiped away a tear, trying to compose herself, but I could see how broken she was too. How torn. She was guilty, yes, but there was something else there. Fear. Regret. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I never wanted to hurt you. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I couldn't look at her anymore. I couldn't stand to see the woman I loved reduced to this, a shell of the person I thought I knew. The betrayal stung in ways I never imagined it would. How could she? How could she betray me like this? Was it me? Was I not enough? Had I done something wrong? I turned away from her, needing space, needing air. The walls of the kitchen felt like they were closing in on me. I felt trapped. Betrayed. I had to get out, to think, to breathe. Without a word, I grabbed my jacket and walked toward the door. Where are you going? Her voice cracked as she called after me, but I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not yet. I stepped outside, into the cold night air, and for the first time in months, I felt truly alone. The world felt unreal. The life I had built, the love I thought was unshakable, had been shattered. And now, all I had left were questions. Questions with no answers. I walked down the driveway, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the silence, as if they were the only thing anchoring me to the ground. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what I was doing. But I couldn't go back. Not yet. Not until I figured out what had just happened to my life. The world felt heavy, and I had no idea how I was going to carry the weight of it. I didn't know where I was going. My feet carried me without purpose, like I was drifting through the motions of life, numb and unsure of what direction to take. The streets were quiet, almost eerily so, and as I walked under the glow of the streetlights, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I thought I understood was unraveling before me. Every thought in my mind felt like a tangle of broken threads, each one leading to another question. How could she do this? Why didn't I see the signs? I thought we were happy. I thought we were solid. But somewhere along the way, things had fallen apart, and I hadn't even noticed. I walked aimlessly for what felt like hours, the cool night air biting at my skin, the stillness of the world around me matching the stillness inside. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't look at it. I couldn't. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face her. Not when I felt so raw, so exposed. The image of her tear-streaked face kept flashing in my mind. I wanted to feel anger, but all I could feel was a deep sadness, a hole in my chest where something that had once felt real and invincible was now a crumbling memory. Eventually, my legs grew tired, and I found myself outside a small park. The swings swayed gently in the breeze, their creaking almost soothing in the quiet. I sat down on a bench, burying my face in my hands, trying to make sense of the mess that had become my life. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to cry. The tears came without warning, hot and heavy, rolling down my face. I didn't try to stop them. I needed this. I needed to release the pain that had been building up, the betrayal, the disappointment. Her words echoed in my mind. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. But it did. And now, here I was, standing on the edge of something I wasn't sure I could come back from. I had always prided myself on trusting her, on believing in the life we were building together. I had never questioned her, never doubted her. And that, in hindsight, had been my mistake. I had let myself get too comfortable, too secure in our routine, in our love. But love isn't always enough. Sometimes, it isn't even close. I pulled my phone from my pocket, staring at the screen for a moment. There were 3 missed calls from her, a string of texts, each one more pleading than the last. I couldn't bring myself to open them. I wasn't ready to hear her apologies, her explanations. Not yet. Instead, I opened my contacts and scrolled to the name I was both dreading and craving to talk to, my brother. I needed someone to talk to. Someone who wouldn't judge me, who wouldn't hold my pain against me. Someone who could help me process everything that had just happened. I hit the call button before I could change my mind. "Hey, man," his voice came through, low and steady, as though he had been expecting my call. My brother had always been the rock I leaned on, and in this moment, I needed that more than ever. "Hey," I replied, my voice rough. "You busy?" "Not really. What's up?" I don't even know where to begin," I said, sitting back on the bench, staring at the empty swings in front of me. She's been seeing someone else. For months. And I just found out." The words left my mouth in a rush, and as soon as I said them, it felt like a weight had been lifted, just a little. But the pain was still there, sharp and fresh, digging into me with every breath. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear my brother processing the information. "Well, shit, man," he finally said, his voice softer now. "I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say. But you know you can talk to me about anything, right?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice breaking for the first time since I walked out of the house. "I thought I knew her. I thought I knew everything about her. But I was wrong." "You weren't wrong for trusting her," my brother said, and there was a certainty in his voice that I didn't feel. "You were just living your life, man. It's not your fault that she chose to lie." I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure if I agreed. Was it really her fault? Or had I just ignored the signs? Was I to blame for not seeing the cracks forming, for not noticing how distant she had become, how much she had withdrawn from me over the last few months? "I don't even know who I am anymore," I whispered. The words came out softer than I intended, as if I were afraid of admitting the truth, afraid of what it meant. "You're still you," my brother replied quickly. "Don't let her make you question who you are. You're stronger than this." I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. "I don't feel strong." He exhaled slowly, his voice calm. "It's okay to feel like this. It's okay to hurt. But you can't let this define you. You've got to work through it. For yourself. Not for her." I sat in silence, letting his words sink in. He was right. I didn't know what the future held, but I couldn't let this destroy me. I had to find a way to move forward, even if that meant facing the pain head-on. "Thanks, man," I finally said, my voice steadier now. I needed to hear that. "I've got your back, always," he replied, and I could hear the sincerity in his voice. "We'll figure this out, one step at a time." We talked for a while longer, the conversation helping me to ground myself, to remind me that there was still some light in my life, even if everything else felt dark. My brother always knew how to put things into perspective, to remind me that there was hope beyond the hurt. After we hung up, I sat there for a while longer, just breathing, letting the cold air clear my head. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if I could ever look at her the same way again. But for the first time in hours, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could take the first step toward healing. And that, I realized, was enough for tonight. Just one step. The next few days felt like an out-of-body experience. I went through the motions of everyday life, working, eating, sleeping, but nothing felt real. It was as if I were walking through a fog, where every step took me farther away from the life I once knew, the life I thought I had with her. I couldn't shake the image of her standing in the kitchen, telling me the truth, and the way her eyes flickered with both guilt and fear. I tried to avoid her calls, avoided the texts, the constant pleading for forgiveness that seemed to come in waves, crashing over me no matter where I went. I needed space. I needed time to think, to process everything that had happened. I hadn't returned home since that night. I'd stayed with my brother for a few days, trying to piece my thoughts together. But the truth was, I wasn't sure what I was trying to figure out. What was I supposed to do? How do you come back from something like this? I had always thought of myself as someone who could handle anything, strong, steady, unshakable. But this? This felt like something I couldn't overcome. The pain, the anger, the humiliation, they were all eating me alive, gnawing at the edges of my consciousness until I could barely think straight. I kept thinking back to the dog food. She had been buying food for a dog they didn't even own, and I still couldn't understand it. Was it just another lie? A small detail that seemed insignificant at the time, but now felt like the crack in the dam that had eventually broken everything apart? I had to wonder if the dog was just a metaphor for the life she was living outside of our marriage, something I couldn't see, something she was keeping from me. There were nights when I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the empty space where she used to sleep. The room felt cold, barren. I wondered how she could stand to be in that bed, knowing what she had done, knowing how far she had gone. I hadn't even asked her about the other man, the one she had been seeing for months. Part of me was terrified to hear about him. To hear how much she had shared with him. What did they talk about? What did she do with him that she couldn't do with me? The questions were endless, and each one chipped away at my heart a little more. But there was something else nagging at me, something I couldn't ignore, the way she looked at me when she confessed. It wasn't just guilt, not just regret. There was a sadness in her eyes, something I couldn't explain, something I couldn't figure out. Was she really sorry, or was she just sorry she got caught? And did it even matter anymore? I picked up my phone again, scrolling through my contacts until I landed on her name. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the message icon. There was so much I wanted to say, but the words didn't come. What could I even say? How do you rebuild a shattered relationship when the foundation has been ripped apart? I had to know more. I had to understand everything, the dog food, the affair, the years we had spent together. My mind was racing, and I couldn't stop it. I needed to talk to her. I needed answers. After a long pause, I hit send. We need to talk. The message felt like a declaration, like a challenge I was throwing out into the universe. It was the first step. The first real attempt to face the truth, no matter how painful it was going to be. I waited. Seconds stretched into minutes, and I could feel the tension building inside me. Would she respond? Would she be ready to face the consequences of her actions? Or was she already moving on, leaving me behind in the wake of her choices? Finally, my phone buzzed. I know. Can we meet? The simplicity of her message felt surreal. A part of me wanted to scream, to throw my phone across the room in frustration. But another part of me, perhaps the part that still loved her, felt a sense of calm wash over me. Maybe this was the moment. The moment where we could try to understand what had happened, and whether or not there was anything left to salvage. I didn't know if I was ready, but I couldn't keep running. I needed answers, and maybe, just maybe, I needed closure. I agreed to meet her at a cafe we used to visit together. It was neutral ground, a place that didn't hold any of the heavy memories of our home, of our life together. It was a place where we could be two people again, without the weight of everything that had happened hanging over us. I arrived first, sitting at a table near the back. The cafe was quiet, the hum of conversation in the background barely noticeable. I stared at the cup of coffee in front of me, the steam rising in delicate tendrils. I hadn't felt this nervous in a long time. My hands were clammy, my thoughts scattered. I tried to focus, but the anticipation was gnawing at me. When she walked in, everything stopped. The world, the noise, the people, it all faded into the background. She was wearing the same scarf she used to wear when we'd go for walks together in the fall, and for a moment, I could almost pretend nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Her eyes met mine, and I saw that familiar hesitation there, the same uncertainty I had seen when she confessed everything to me. But this time, there was something different. She wasn't just afraid of what I would say. She was afraid of losing me. She sat down across from me, her hands folded in her lap. For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was so much to say, but none of it felt right. I didn't know where to start, and neither did she. I don't know how to begin, she said finally, her voice trembling. I've hurt you in ways I can never take back, and I don't know if I can ever make up for it. I nodded, not sure what to say. What was there to say? She was right. She had hurt me. She had betrayed me, and nothing could change that. But there was still something in her eyes, a desperate, vulnerable plea that reached through the walls I had built around myself. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, she continued. But I need you to know that this wasn't something I planned. It wasn't something I wanted. It just happened. I wanted to scream, to tell her how much pain she had caused me. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to understand her. I needed to understand what had led her to this point. Why the dog food? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. It had been haunting me, the strange symbolism of it all. Why did you keep buying it? Her face softened, and she looked down at the table, as if gathering her thoughts. "The dog," she whispered. "It wasn't a dog. It was just a symbol. A way for me to hold on to the idea of something more. I wasn't ready to face what I was doing. I wasn't ready to face the reality of what was happening." I leaned back in my chair, trying to make sense of what she was saying. The dog wasn't real. It was just a metaphor. But it felt like so much more than that. It felt like the entire relationship had been a series of small lies, building up until it had collapsed under its own weight. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all of this," I said, the words heavy in my chest. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." "I understand," she said quietly. "And I'm not asking you to. I needed to tell you the truth." I stared at her, the woman I had once thought I knew, and for the first time in days, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it wasn't forgiveness. Maybe it wasn't even the end. But for the first time, I felt like I could breathe again. We had a long way to go, I realized. But perhaps this was the first step back toward something real. The days following our meeting at the cafe were a blur. I don't think either of us really knew how to move forward, but something had shifted between us. There was no going back to the way things had been. We were broken, and yet, there was still a quiet part of me that wanted to believe we could find a way through this. I wasn't sure if that was hope or just denial, but I held on to it, fragile as it was. She called again that evening. I almost didn't answer, the temptation to stay distant growing stronger by the minute. But I picked up, my finger hovering over the decline button, the silence in the room heavy as I stared at the phone. It felt like the weight of the world was pressing down on me, but I couldn't ignore her anymore. "Hey," her voice came through, softer this time. There was an unfamiliar calm in it, something that made me pause. "I know we're not okay. I know I don't deserve to ask for anything, but I need to tell you something. In person. Please." I didn't respond right away. The silence between us stretched, and I felt the full force of the choice I was making. Was I really ready to open this chapter again? Was I ready to sit with her, face to face, and try to make sense of the mess we had created? It felt like I was teetering on the edge of something, and one wrong move would send me spiraling. But something deep inside me, something raw and vulnerable, said that maybe, just maybe, I owed it to myself to hear her out. Maybe there was still something left in us, something worth fighting for. "I'll meet you," I said, finally breaking the silence. "Where?" Her voice shook with a strange mix of relief and fear. "Same place. I'll be there in an hour." I didn't know what I was expecting, but when I saw her walk through the door of the cafe, I felt a tightening in my chest. She looked different, somehow, distant yet present, like someone who had been carrying a burden for too long and had finally let it go. Her eyes found mine immediately, and in that brief second, I saw everything. All the pain. The regret. The love. I stood up to meet her halfway. The air between us felt thick with unsaid words, but neither of us spoke for a moment. We just stood there, across from each other, as though we were two strangers who had once known each other intimately but had now lost that connection. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me, her eyes red and swollen, and I could see that she had been crying for days. "I don't know if I can ever fix this. I don't know if you can ever forgive me. But I need you to know that I am truly sorry. For everything." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Part of me wanted to say something harsh, something that would let me release all the anger and frustration I had been holding on to. But when I opened my mouth, all that came out was a quiet, "Why?" The question felt like the weight of everything I had been carrying. Why had she done this? Why had she lied to me? Why had she kept the truth from me for so long, even when the signs were all around her? "I don't even know," she said, shaking her head, her voice cracking. "I thought I was protecting you, but I wasn't. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to face what I had done to you, to us. I thought if I could just keep up the illusion, everything would be okay. But it never was. And it's the biggest regret of my life." Her words cut through me like a blade, sharp and deep, but I wasn't sure how to feel. It felt like everything we had built had been shattered in an instant, like the person I had loved so deeply was now someone I didn't recognize. The trust we had was gone, and I didn't know if it was something I could ever rebuild. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she continued, her eyes searching mine. "I just need you to know the truth. I've been living in this constant guilt, this constant shame. I didn't know how to face you. I didn't know how to fix what I had broken." The words hung in the air, but I still couldn't bring myself to speak. How could I? How could I possibly find the words to explain what I was feeling? The anger, the sadness, the confusion? It was all there, tangled up inside of me, and I couldn't untangle it. But as I stood there, looking at her, the woman who had once meant everything to me, I realized that there was still a part of me that cared. A part of me that wanted to believe that she hadn't just thrown everything away. That maybe, somehow, we could find a way to work through this. I don't know if I can trust you again, I said, finally finding my voice. My words were heavy, but there was a certain relief in letting them out. But I can't just pretend like this didn't happen. I can't just walk away and forget about it. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I understand. I know I've lost your trust. And I know I don't deserve to ask for another chance. But if there's any part of you that thinks we could ever work through this, I'm willing to try. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose everything we had. Her plea hit me like a wave, and I felt myself struggling to stay afloat. There were so many questions, so much pain, but in her eyes, I saw the same vulnerability, the same longing for something more that I felt deep inside of me. I need time, I said, the words coming out slower now. I need time to think. I don't know if we can fix this. But I'm not ready to walk away yet. She nodded again, a faint glimmer of hope in her eyes. I'll give you all the time you need. I don't want to rush you, and I don't want to pressure you. I just want to be honest with you. And I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here. For a moment, we just stood there, neither of us knowing what to do next. I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders, and yet, there was something freeing about being able to say those words out loud. I wasn't sure if we would ever get past this. But for the first time since I found out the truth, I felt like I was taking a step in the right direction. As I walked away from the cafe, I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know if I could ever fully heal from the betrayal, but I knew that I wasn't ready to give up on the person I once loved. Maybe that was enough for now, just the space to breathe, the space to think, and the hope that one day, we could find a way to move forward. But for the first time in weeks, I had a sense of peace. It wasn't the end, and it wasn't the beginning of a fairy tale. It was somewhere in between, a raw and uncertain journey, but it was mine to walk.